Set in the Old West, the film places us in the year 1864, shortly after the Second Schleswig War, a military conflict in which the Austrian Empire and Prussia fought against Denmark. Since Denmark was defeated, the Danish brothers John and Peter Jensen emigrated to the United States and settled somewhere between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains. After a long wait and feeling somewhat nervous, John stands at a station with his brother. As the train's passengers disembark, John grows more impatient, beginning to believe that those he is waiting for won't appear. Just then, a woman and a child step off the train, his wife Mary and his son Keston. After a long time apart, he finally has his family by his side. Although Peter also welcomes them, he decides not to accompany them on their journey home, preferring to remain in town a while since he likes lingering in the places he visits. After that, John rents a stagecoach they must share with a local couple who try to speak with Mary until her husband intercedes, mentioning that she still does not speak English. Before they set out, the couple is expelled from the stagecoach due to a supposed mistake, even though they had already paid for their seats. Their places are taken by a pair of recently freed outlaws named Paul and Lester, which does not please the Jensens. Still, it's the last stagecoach of the day. On the way, John wins the trust of his son, who barely knows him because John left when he was only 3 years old. He tells the boy about their home and all the things he built for their arrival, even offering to take him hunting the following day. The outlaws spoil the moment with their drunkenness and offer Mary a drink. Her husband urges her to accept it since it is a local tradition, and also because the criminals would be offended if she refused. This seems to calm things down for a moment, but Paul soon resumes bothering Mary, groping her. That's when the protagonist's patience runs out, and he demands that the two behave. Lester silences him by showing his revolver, which his companion uses as an opportunity to fondle Mary more aggressively. In their native language, John suggests that she bite the outlaw's ear, which distracts Lester. Thanks to this, the protagonist seizes his revolver and turns the situation around. Or so it seemed, because there is another revolver on the floor. Unable to stop aiming at the outlaws, he asks his son to pick it up. Unfortunately, Lester quickly subdues the boy and threatens to cut his throat. As a result, John has no choice but to lower his weapon, and the criminals push him out of the stagecoach. The man immediately gets up and runs after the coach with all his might, but it only moves farther away. After a long chase, he comes upon something no father ever wants to see: his son's corpse. Heartbroken, the man hugs him and carries him along the road until he finds the stagecoach. Both the driver and the guard lie dead on the ground. John takes the rifle from one of them and shoots Lester, who was keeping watch. As for Paul, he receives the same treatment and, while crawling, claims the woman is still alive. Of course, John does not budge and empties the rest of the magazine into him. Peering into the stagecoach, he confirms that the outlaw was lying. Not only had they abused his wife, they also killed her. Devastated, the man returns home carrying the bodies of his murdered family. He left without them and returned without them. By the time Peter shows up and learns what happened, he offers comfort to his brother, who finally allows himself to cry at his side. What John does not know is that his ordeal has only just begun. It turns out that Paul was the brother of Henry Dearue, the infamous leader of a dangerous gang and a ruthless landowner in the town of Black Creek. Henry arrives to find his brother's bullet-ridden corpse. Thirsty for vengeance, he demands that Mayor Kinn and Sheriff Malik find the culprit within 2 hours. If they fail to meet the deadline, the citizens will pay the price. When the time comes, the mayor and the sheriff have not even a clue about Paul's murderer. Thus, they are forced to sacrifice an old woman who volunteered herself and a crippled man. Without a second's hesitation, Henry executes both, not caring that the old woman's grandson is present. Far from satisfied, he also kills another random man, claiming it was the only way to compensate for taking an old woman and a legless man. He then raises the town's protection fee until they find his brother's killer. After burying Paul, Henry approaches Madeline, a mute woman whose tongue was cut out by native Indians in her youth. Although he promises to kill the one responsible for making her a widow, she only asks him to be silent while she cries for her husband. For his part, John decides to leave the region in an attempt to move on. He visits the nearby town of Black Creek to sell his belongings. There he is recognized by the couple from before who were kicked off the stagecoach. They go straight to the sheriff's office. Meanwhile, Peter enters the main store, now run by Bach, the grandson of the murdered old woman. The young man quickly deduces that the Jensen brothers were soldiers and wants to hire their services to stand up to Henry's gang. However, Peter refuses, since it's a battle they cannot win. John then visits Kin's office to sell him his land. The mayor can't offer much money due to his debt to Henry, so he tells him about the supposed lunatic who killed Paul in a stagecoach. Hearing this, the protagonist realizes he is the one they are talking about. Luckily, there were no cameras back then. Trying to hide his surprise, John accepts the money and plans to leave as soon as possible. However, on his way out, Sheriff Malik intercepts him, shooting down his horse. Elsewhere, Henry and Madeline, who is also his accountant, meet with Jenkins, the head of the Standard Atlantic Oil Company, an oil enterprise that wants to seize Black Creek and its surroundings, as the land is rich in untapped oil. Jenkins informs them that they intercepted Malik's message for help, ensuring that the authorities know nothing about what's happening in the town. Therefore, he makes it clear to Henry that the situation must remain as it is. Back with John, he watches as they throw his brother into the cell adjacent to his. He asks Malik to let him go since he had nothing to do with Paul's murder. However, the sheriff replies that Peter broke his assistant's jaw, meaning he will also be sentenced. The sheriff is the first to apologize to John for the situation, mentioning that his death will appease Henry's anger long enough for the authorities to arrive. Speaking of Henry, Malik recalls that he once was a valiant army colonel and a good man, but the war against the Indians corrupted him completely. The next morning, El Corso, Henry's right-hand man, comes looking for the protagonist and escorts him to their base in an abandoned town. There, John is tied to a post, exposed to the scorching sun. When Henry arrives, he calls him a husband killer, to which John replies that that husband killed his wife and son. The criminal silences him with slaps, while Madeline watches with fury. After a while, Kin arrives with some property deeds for the gang, revealing he has been working with them from the start. Once Malik leaves the sheriff's office to attend mass, Peter, still in his cell, begins to provoke the assistant he previously beat up. Eventually, the officer takes the bait and goes to attack him. Peter quickly grabs him by the legs and slams him into the bars, thus obtaining the cell keys. That night, after sleeping with Madeline, Henry admits he always wanted to do it with her, especially because of her silence. When she turns her face, we see that not only did he abuse her, he also beat her. Taking advantage of the storm, Peter sneaks into the gang's base and silently takes out several outlaws until he frees his brother. Madeline witnesses this, but does not raise the alarm. Still, Henry finds out from the gunshots and spots the brothers fleeing. Naturally, he doesn't intend to let them go. On the way, Peter realizes John is too weak to ride. He prefers to hide him among some rocks, promising he will return for him. Nevertheless, he leaves him a rifle in case he cannot keep his promise. With that, Peter mounts his horse and heads off to distract their pursuers. At dawn, the protagonist regains consciousness just in time to see the outlaws dragging his brother's corpse across the field. Upon returning to their base, Henry discovers his guards murdered and his safe opened. The only person missing is Madeline. Right now, she boards a train hoping to escape her tyrannical brother-in-law and start a new life. Unfortunately, the train is intercepted by El Corso and his men, who swiftly capture her. John wanders through the countryside looking for water and shelter, and eventually reaches the home of Mrs. Whistler, whose husband was one of the 3 civilians Henry killed at the start. She mistakes John for an outlaw and even tries to shoot him. However, she lowers her guard when she realizes he is just a dying man. Mrs. Whistler offers him her home as a refuge, while she and her children flee the town in fear of Henry's reprisals. Speaking of Henry, he now has Madeline back, and she spits on him despite his slaps. Outraged, he acknowledges that Paul saved her from the Indians, though he never tamed her. Therefore, he allows his men to have fun with her, and when they are done, they have orders to kill her that same night. A recovered John surprises Mayor Kin, demanding the boots Kin took from him when he was hanging from the post. As Kin also serves as the undertaker, the protagonist forces him into one of his coffins and closes the lid with him inside. After this, John goes to buy weapons from Boychek, the storekeeper, instructing him to inform everyone about the mayor's betrayal. When he learns John is going after the gang, the young man offers his help, but John refuses precisely because he's just a kid. The next day, Henry receives Kin's coffin, indicating that a battle is coming. At that moment, Bach opens fire on the bandits, revealing that John did accept him in his plan after all. The young man acts as a distraction until the outlaws realize that the barn is on fire from the ground up. From the front, the protagonist fires at them with his rifle, demonstrating the guerrilla tactics he learned as a soldier. On the rooftop of the bar, Boychuk continues shooting at the bandits, revealing his position to El Corso and his men, who were guarding Madeline. They manage to shoot the boy from below, so he pours the kerosene from his bottles onto them, starting another fire. El Corso has no choice but to escape through the window, still holding the woman captive. After seeing Boychuk fall, John focuses on El Corso and guns him down, indirectly helping Madeline. Following the sound, one outlaw discovers the entrance to the cellar where the protagonist is hiding. Spotting his rifle out of the corner of his eye, he lies down to the floor to try and listen. John responds by stabbing him through the wood. Just after finishing off the outlaw, John is caught off guard by a shot from Henry, who admits he underestimated him. Right before pulling the trigger again, the criminal is shot from behind by Madeline, and John finishes him with a bullet to the head. After that, both of them point their guns at each other out of pure instinct until they realize they are not enemies, only victims of the same monster. Sheriff Malik and his men arrive on the scene and thank the Avenger who ended their nightmare. Although they consider Madeline one of Henry's last associates, John makes it clear that he is leaving with her. The sheriff warns him it's not a good idea, so John raises his weapon. With no other choice, the officers withdraw and leave them in peace. Free of any threat, John and Madeline ride off into the horizon in search of a new life. Over time, we see that the oil company took control of the region. Perhaps the gunslinger should return someday.
If you want interesting movie recaps, like, share, and subscribe to follow us for more movie recaps.